Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, on behalf of the University of Tartu community, it's really my great pleasure to extend to you a very, very warm welcome. There are no two other peoples in Europe who are as close as Estonians and Finns. So said one of your predecessors, late Martti Ahtisaari, from this very rostrum almost exactly 30 years ago. It is indeed very true. However, seen from the Estonian side, the feeling of closeness and kinship is also mixed with a great sense of gratitude. Since national awakening in the mid-19th century, Estonians have moved in the footsteps of Finns, as if following the example of an older brother, until this common path came to the end in 1939. It would take too long to mention here everything that Finns have done for Estonia, so thus I will limit myself reiterating that without the help of Finland's volunteer comrades in arms in the Estonian War of Independence, the newborn Republic of Estonia might have disappeared into the black hole of history even before its first birthday. But without the victory in the War of Independence, we would not have a national university and national sciences. The Finnish aid was equally indispensable in bringing about the latter. Finnish scholars whose invaluable contribution to commemorate on the plaque we actually just passed on the staircase of your way to this room at the University main hall, played a central role in laying the foundation of Estonian language university. This twofold, both military and academic assistance, is perhaps the best epitomized by the linguist Lauri Kettunen. I showed you the name on the plaque, whose name is also found on the plaque, among many others from Sweden and from Finland. In December 1918, during the Estonian War of Independence, when Russia had conquered almost two-thirds of Estonian territory, Kettunen wrote a letter, a leaflet, which was published in the Estonian press, and it was entitled, "Hold on, Estonian Brothers." And he arrived in Tallinn a few days later with the first company of Finnish volunteer soldiers. And Kettunen is one of the few two times recipients of Estonian Cross of Liberty. First, he risked his life to defend Estonian statehood with a gun in his hand, and then, with the battle of the Estonian War of Independence still raging at that time, he became the first professor of Baltic Finnish languages at the university he helped to establish. In a moment, we are going to listen to Mr. President's speech on world order after 2022. And due to the time constraints, I'm not going to recite Mr. Alexander Stubb's biography here, as I assume that you all are familiar with the president's career. And I would just like to highlight the fact that Mr. Stubb was described as a firm supporter of Finland's accession to NATO already in 2008. When appointed foreign minister. That was at the time when the likelihood of Finland ending its policy of military non-alignment seemed very, very small. And today, what has once improbable, I would say, has become a reality. And Finland and Estonia are now working closely within the European Union and the NATO to safeguard themselves as the whole of Europe against a repetition of the past scenarios. So, Your Excellency, please allow me to once again express our real gratitude for this opportunity to welcome you at the University of Tartu. And, Mr. President, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rector, for those kind words. It's lovely to be here today. Really appreciate it. Some of you might know that I have what I call a wannabe academic background. You can see the difference between the Estonian and the Finnish president in that the Estonian president has been a rector of a university and I've only been a director of a school. But my experience is actually from the past 4 years when I was at the European University Institute in Florence, and it always gives me a lot of joy and pleasure to come back to my academic roots. And that's why probably more than your regular presidential speech today, I'll try to give a lecture or an understanding of what's going on in the world. It's a little bit of a pan out in the sense that I've been working on a book for the better part of 3 years, trying to understand the new world order. But I think it's very timely also for us, Finns and Estonians, because whenever a world order changes, we can quite easily become, well, buttons in that little game of world politics, and we have to avoid that. I'm also really happy to be here at Tartu University, not only because of its history and tradition, but also because there's so many Finnish students around. Can I just get a raise of hands how many Finnish students we have here? Yeah. Yeah. See, not bad. Watch out, they might take over soon. Yeah. And the nice thing is that most of them are veterinary students and they're here to listen world politics. So. Great. So what I'll do today is I'll give an introduction, and then I have sketched out my lecture into 3 points, one of which is how order changes, the second one is how the balance is changing, and the third one is how dynamics of world politics are changing. And by way of introduction, I think it's good to recall that in international relations and in world politics, there are always those moments in history when something changes. Sometimes we understand it, at other times we, with the wisdom of hindsight, are able to analyze what happened. But I would argue that for the generation of students here today, and for our generation, this is our 1918, 1945, or 1989, or in the Estonian case, 1991 moment. Why do I say that? I say that because in 1918, of course, after World War I, there was an aim to change the order through the League of Nations, which in and of itself was a nice idea, but it wasn't sustainable in the sense that we ended up in World War II. So it didn't succeed. 1945, the UN was created, and pretty much the current international order, and more or less it worked during the Cold War in the sense that you had two superpowers in the United States and the Soviet Union that kept a balance of power and didn't drive the system into a world war. And then, of course, in 1989, many of us became what I call Fukuyama-esque, which means that we believed that we were witnessing the end of history. We saw it, of course, here in Estonia. We saw it all around the world when there was a sense that in the big power struggle of ideologies between the Soviet Union and the United States had won. So capitalism liberal democracy, globalization, and freedom would be the preferred choice of all of the world's 200 nation states. And of course, in the beginning, it did feel like that. Things were going the right way. But the bottom line is that we got a little bit lazy in our thinking about the international order and didn't realize that not everyone wanted to be exactly like us. Now, why do I then use my final point in the introduction, 2022, as my starting point? Well, yeah, I guess I could have used 9/11 in 2001, or I could have used the financial crisis in 2008, or I could have chosen, the election of Donald Trump as President of the United States in 2016. But I think 2020, or I could have used Russia's attack on Georgia in 2008, or the annexation of Crimea in 2014. But the reason that I choose 2022 is that is when the major shift starts to take place, where we have to realize from our part that history did not end. We're witnessing the end of the post-Cold War era and the emergence of some kind of a new order in this world. In my mind, it'll take about 10 years to settle, and then it's a question of whether we as small states are able to impact that change, or are we just going to be spectators. Of course, someone like Lennart Meri would have taught us that small states really have to make their voices heard. So let me go on to the 3 points then: order, balance, and dynamics, before I conclude. On the order side, it might be a slight simplification to say, but I still say it, that the Cold War was bipolar, the United States versus the Soviet Union. When the Cold War ended in 1989, we saw the emergence of a unipolar world. And a unipolar world driven by the United States as the world police. We thought that all countries in the world would gravitate towards democracy, globalization, and market economy. And the world seemed quite clear in many ways. Of course, the Soviet Union collapsed, and that had its ripple effects in so many different ways. But the emergence of independent states gave us hope that freedom would prevail. Then, at some stage, perhaps after 9/11, when we were not that true to our values of democracy, we started to see what Fareed Zakaria called the emergence of the others. So we saw middle powers growing. I mean, there was a lot of talk about the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Korea. But I think the biggest driver there, of course, was China in many ways. The financial crisis made the West look a little bit weak. It sort of gave a sentiment that the system is not under control, and perhaps capitalism and the financial markets is not providing the growth that it was supposed to give us. And of course, we had the asylum crisis, which didn't exactly make us look very good in the summer of 2016, or the election of Donald Trump as President of the United States. We had Brexit in 2016. So there was this feeling that perhaps the Western model of society is not necessarily the most stable and functional. Having said all of that, we then went to this multipolar world where there was no clear world leader, which makes things a little bit messy because we don't know exactly who is in or under control. And I would argue that the world we live in today is driven by big power competition, China and the United States, but a lot of middle powers coming in wanting to have their say. Obviously, Russia in a rather aggressive way, India, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and many others. And what we're witnessing right now is a challenge to the old order, and a challenge to the rules-based world order, which we so often talk about. So the institutions that were created right after World War II, when the balance was bipolar and settled, is basically under threat. The UN is not functioning because its Security Council is not functioning. The IMF, the World Bank, the WTO are not necessarily delivering the goods that they wanted. International institutions are much weaker than what they were during the Cold War, or actually right after the Cold War had ended. So the order is in flux and we don't know exactly where it's going to settle. My second point is then about the balance. So there's a shifting of the power balance in the world right now, and basically a shift in values, power, and interest. And in my book, I try to simplify the world into three spheres: the global West, the global East, and the global South, with all the caveats, of course, of generalization. But here my argument is that we in the global West, we're roughly speaking 50 countries, most of Europe, North America, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. We want to preserve the current order. And why do we do it? Well, because we think it's good, but also because it actually benefits us, and also because we were the ones who created it in the aftermath of World War II. Then there's the global East. That's roughly speaking 25 countries, led by China, followed by Russia, Iran, and many other countries that vote in the UN with these countries. And there we have to distinguish between Chinese international relations and Russian international relations, because China is strategic and patient. It creates its path towards dependency through projects. It is actually the biggest creditor of 120 countries out of 200 countries in this world. And you know, when you're the biggest loan giver, you have a lot of power. It has created the Belt and Road Initiative, it has created the Global Development Initiative, and it has created the Global Security Initiative. It's very strategic in the way in which it works. And of course, technologically, highly developed society. Whereas Russia, again, is back to old-style aggression, imperialism, and acquisition of territory. It believes that its existence is based on taking from others, of denying the identity of others. I don't think the Chinese are doing that, but the Russians certainly are. But to simplify all of this into the West versus the East, I think is too much. It's not about liberal democracy versus authoritarian regimes. It's much more complicated than that. And this is where I come to my third sphere, which is the global South. And I fully understand that lumping 125 countries together is not fair. But my argument here is that it's the global South, by and large, that will decide the direction in which the new world order will tilt. India is obviously the most populated country in the world and will provide for a strong dynamic in Asia. Saudi Arabia in the Persian Gulf and the Middle East, Nigeria and South Africa in Africa, and Brazil, among others, in Latin America. They are the middle powers that will have a lot of say in security, in economics, in institutional development. And my big point, which I'm going to say in my conclusion, is that we in the West have to understand that unless we change our behavioral pattern towards the global East and especially the global South, we might lose this game. So the question is, how far can we push our agenda of liberal democracy, social market economy, and globalization? Do we want that system of freedom to win, or do we just retract to our own little world and coexist happily as Estonia and Finland? So my point here is that we're looking at a new balance, which is a battle about values, about power, and about interests. My third and final point is about the dynamics. So if the order is in flux and the balance is tilting, what are the dynamics that are going to sort of make things settle, if it settles at all? And here, again, with the fear of, danger of being overly Cartesian, again, three dynamics. The first dynamics is competition, the second one is conflict, and the third one is cooperation. On competition, I believe that we will witness big power competition, strategic competition, which is in many ways between the United States and China, and then sort of has a ripple effect into everything that we do. The second part of competition is technological competition, which we spoke about this morning, which is of course one of the key global goods. If you understand, if you're able to work on in the fields of artificial intelligence, in the fields of quantum computing, in the fields of CRISPR technology, robotization, etc., you get an upper edge in any situation that exists. And the third level of competition is, of course, economy. And I remind you all that what China is trying to do is to tell the global South that, listen, development is not about democracy, it's about economy, and we will help you to grow economically. And it's a very powerful argument, no matter where you come from in the world. If you can see that China has been able to create in its system an economic model which is state-driven, not traditionally capitalistic, someone might just jump on to that. The second fear that I have is that if we go into this cycle of competition, it can very easily spill into conflict. And that, of course, we're seeing right now. And conflicts can be local, regional, or global. Local conflict is what we saw after the end of the Cold War, when conflict took place within a country, between different players, not so much between countries. Yes, there have been border disputes, but most of the time the conflicts remained very local and mediation was fairly simple and straightforward. The worry is that a local conflict becomes regional. And that, of course, we're now seeing between Israel and Hamas, or Israel and Gaza, where we are constantly afraid that this will escalate in the region. The same thing, of course, goes with Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine. Is there a danger of this escalating, and if so, in which way? The third and worst part of it is, of course, if we go towards some kind of a global war. I don't believe that is going to happen, but I just flag it that if you don't contain competition, it can lead to a dynamic effect in conflicts, which is never good. And therefore, we need the third dynamic, which is cooperation. I know there are a lot of people who don't believe in cooperation or international institutions or multilateralism anymore, but don't give up on that. It is still the best way to contain big power competition. And of course, to be honest, in no way can we solve the biggest challenges of mankind without cooperation. Climate change, technology, demography, economy, they're all in many ways global goods which have to be taken care of within some kind of a rule framework. And here's where I come to my conclusion after having looked at order, balance, and dynamics. So what kind of a world are we in right now? First of all, I would argue that it is not even multipolar anymore. We are in a world of multi-alignment, which means that we are creating these types of strategic alliances around the world. Look at the United States, for instance. NATO for the US is a strategic alliance to contain Russian aggression in Ukraine. Its relationship with Israel is a strategic alliance to try to contain the situation in the Middle East, as is its relations with Saudi Arabia. It is not stricto sensu based on values, it is based pretty much on interests. The US has the Quad, which is cooperation between Japan, India, and the United States. It has AUKUS, which is nuclear submarine cooperation between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the US. BRICS is about strategic alignment. There's nothing that unites the BRICS except the discontent for the Western world. And the BRICS actually has 19 countries that have applied for membership to a letter combination: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Korea, which was created by a Goldman Sachs economist in the form of Jim O'Neill. So the bottom line is that we live in a world where there is a lot of strategic alignment. It's almost a little bit a la carte, so you pick and choose your allies. Secondly, I think the world is also about agency, and here is where I come to my main point. The global south does not feel that it has agency. In other words, a say in the current global system, right? So it doesn't have a seat in the UN Security Council. It doesn't have enough voting power in the IMF or the World Bank. It doesn't feel that it's rightly treated in the WTO, so therefore it seeks alternative forms of cooperation. And this is what we have to understand. And here is where I come to my final point and my recommendation to, I guess, not only Finland, but perhaps the Western world and especially Estonia. I base my foreign policy on something I call value-based realism. Value-based realism, I would argue, gives space for foreign policy. What does it mean? It means that you rest basically on two pillars. One is values. So you still believe strongly in the basic values which have created Baltic and Nordic and European societies. So human rights, fundamental rights, freedom, democracy, rule of law, protection of minorities, international institutions and rules. You believe that they're collective global goods that you have to manage together within a clear international order. You stick to that. You don't give up that idea. But then we come to the realism point. You are realistic that not everyone in the world wants to be Estonian. We Finns do, of course. But the bottom line is that not everyone is going to become a liberal democracy. Not everyone is going to become a functioning republic. Not everyone believes in social market economy or freedom. Not everyone believes in liberal institutionalism or international liberalism. And that means that you are going to have to compromise your values from time to time to be able to solve the big global crises that exist. War, at the end of the day, requires compromise, whether we like it or not, otherwise it's endless. Climate change necessitates compromise. Economy necessitates compromise. And all of this comes, in my mind, also to dignified behavior in diplomacy and international politics. So a respect towards the other. Of course, you can now ask me for hundreds of examples where you don't need to do it. But the bottom line is that if we want to maintain the remnants of the current order, number one, if we want to make sure that the balance doesn't tilt too far away from the global West, number two, and if we want to make sure that the dynamics don't go from competition to conflict, but remain in cooperation, it'll require difficult compromises from our side as well. We live in a completely new world order. We can get it wrong, as they did in 1918. We can get it right, as they did in 1945, or we can just be lazy, as we were in 1989. With these words, thank you very much for listening.
First of all, Mr. President, thank you for your standpoints. That's something new, I think, that for all of us. And thank you for this, your view. But now I'm happy to introduce also our distinguished colleague, Piret Ehin. She is a professor of comparative politics, and she will take, and then if there are questions from the audience, so that she will take the questions and comments if there are available. So please, Piret.
Thank you very much, Rector Asser. Thank you so very much, President Stubb, for helping us imagine this still nameless post-Cold War era, which, as you said, is likely to be multi-aligned, where agency matters so much and where so much is at stake for small countries. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move on to the question and answer session. We only have about 15 minutes for this. I'm delighted to moderate. I will collect questions from the audience. If you would like to pose a question, please raise your hand. And please wait for the microphone. I will collect about 3 questions if we have time, but I'm not sure. There will be an opportunity for another round of questions. I particularly look forward to hearing from the students. I already saw a hand in the back. Could we please have the microphone? And another hand over there.
Arvoisa presidentti, olen Milla-Maria Hyyrynen, lääketieteen opiskelija täällä Tartun yliopistossa. Olen asunut täällä perheeni kanssa 3 vuotta ja lapseni käyvät Tartun suomalaista koulua. Olen kokenut suurena rikkautena sen, että lapseni saavat tutustua syvemmin virolaiseen kieleen ja kulttuuriin, kuten itsekin. Ja kun asuu maassa, jonka kieli ja tavat ovat kohtalaisen samat kuin omat, mutta kuitenkin erit, näkee myös uutta omassa maassaan. Ja kysymykseni teille koskee suomalaisten ja virolaisten ihmisten suhteita. Kansoillamme on perinteisesti ollut tiiviit suhteet. Miten näkisitte, että voisimme lähitulevaisuudessa entisestään syventää näitä suhteita? The people of Finland and Estonia have traditionally had close relations. How do you think we could further deepen these relations in the near future?
Thank you very much. Let us collect another question. Over there. There was a hand here first. Yes, please pass it on.
Mr. President, thank you for your speech. My name is Yuri Kondratek. I'm a master's student in political science at the University of Tartu. And my question to you that was intriguing me and I would like to ask you is, how can Global West ensure the ongoing support for Ukraine following the uncertainty of the upcoming US presidential election?
Thank you so much. And a third question back there.
Hello. My name is Manu, I'm coming from Kyrgyzstan, and my question is, you several times mentioned UN and the Security Council, and in the current turmoil that the world is in, do you think that the veto power is still relevant? Should it be abolished? Should it be modified in some way, or it should stay the same? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And President Stubb?
Sure. No, thanks. 3 very good questions. And sorry for answering the first one in English rather than in Finnish. So how can we deepen Finnish-Estonian relations? First of all, you might have seen my speech in Riigikogu on Monday, and I talked about us being family, friends, and allies, and that we are in many ways, with our alliance in NATO, now turning a new page in our relations. You, Mr. Rector, talked about Big Brother earlier. I would actually say that we're brothers and sisters. There's no big brothers or big sisters in this relationship. And there are, of course, many ways we do it. One is the one that you mentioned, which is basically identity, education, and language-based. And I think just the fact that we have so many Finnish students in Tartu is a credit to the relationship that we already have. The fact that we have tens of thousands of Estonians working, living, and getting an education in Finland is another example thereof. We have a very similar value base and understanding of the world, and we also live right next to an existential threat in the form of Russia. So that sort of brings us together already. A second one is technology. I think Estonia has done a lot of great stuff in tech, and I'm not only talking about the brand of e-Estonia and everything that goes into it, but you have become, or Estonia has become, one of the most sophisticated tech societies in the world. We have a lot to learn from that one. And then, of course, the third one really is hard security and what we do inside the alliance. And that's why President Karis and I have visited many different places during this state visit as well, whereby I'm able to deepen my understanding of what we can do together. Second question on the US elections and the global West as it might be viewed in the global South. I think the starting point is that I think the shift between the global West, the global East, and the global South probably started before the US elections in 2016 and before, I would argue, Brexit as well. In US history, there are presidents who change the line of future presidents. I think Roosevelt and the New Deal was one example. Reagan and Reaganomics, or neoliberal economic policy, was another example. And I actually think that Trump has changed the American foreign policy line already. We, of course, will live with whichever president is elected. But if I may look at the silver lining, the United States, regardless of who is president, wants to remain a superpower. And their focus is very strongly right now on China. And in order for the United States to remain a superpower, it needs close allies. And that means, especially in Europe, within the framework of NATO, but it also means allies in the Middle East. This is all part and parcel of a bigger shift in the alliances, but that's why my message for us Europeans is that if we base our foreign policy on value-based realism, I think we might have quite a lot more impact. The final question came from Mana from Kurdistan. Is the UN still relevant? I would argue yes, it is. And I simplify it in the sense that I think the UN in New York, which we often look at, in other words, the political arm of the UN, is less relevant because it's not able to churn decisions from the UN Security Council. But the agencies of the UN, which are based in Geneva, COP, UNCTAD, UNICEF, and so on and so forth, they still have a lot of relevance and impact. So there's sort of a difference between the political impact and the functional impact, and I think the functional impact is there. If we want to get the political one to work, we have to start reforming the UN, fully realizing how difficult it is. But that's just how things are. But yes, it is still relevant.
Thank you so much.
It's okay.
I'm afraid that we do not have...
One at least.
We have, I'm delighted to confirm, we have time for one more question from the audience. Yes, in the back.
This better be good.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, for this speech. My name is Gerto Birgit Anton, and I have a question that stems from the history of colonialism that we, as part of the Western sphere, still sort of benefit to till this date. And my question is that, with this in mind, how much justification do we even have for trying to keep the current global order still in place, where we hold the dominant position? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much aware of the post-colonial debate that we have in universities and especially in international relations. And I think it's a very relevant one. And that's why I try to frame my policy line as value-based realism, which opens up a certain sense of understanding and humility to our past. Now, of course, for countries like Finland and Estonia, colonialism is not a problem in the sense that we have not been colonial powers. But there are other European countries that do that. Having said all of that, I think the global south needs to understand that the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire is by definition also a colonial power. So we try to find a balance in everything that we do, but the big problem that I find quite often in foreign policy is that we in the West, and I think we're completely on the same line here, we take the moral high ground. We go and lecture, and we say that if you do not follow my value base, I will not cooperate or open my markets. And I think that's the wrong way to approach it, especially for those powers that have that strong colonial past. I fully understand that foreign policy is always a balance between values, interests, and powers, but you have to also then understand in that balance, if you come from the global West, that we are about to lose that game if there is not a sense of humility and humbleness in what we do. I'm not talking about creating truth commissions or anything like that, but I'm just talking about modern, dignified, respectful behavior towards the global south. You get much further with that than with this sort of arrogant colonialism that we've so often seen.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for providing so much food for thought as we enter and contemplate this new era. I will certainly take with me from this discussion the idea of value-based realism, and I will think about what that might mean and how that might translate into concrete policy action. It is a pity that we will have to conclude our discussion here. In 10 minutes, there will be a closing ceremony in front of the main building, and you are all very, very welcome to join this ceremony. Before I ask you to join me in thanking President Stubb and Rector Asser, I know that the Rector wants to have a word.
Yes, first of all, Mr. President, thank you. Thank you again for this honor, having you here in Tartu and the university, and specifically for this very inspiring meeting and your standpoints. But just to ensure that you will take some memories from the Tartu and from the university, I'd like to give you a small keepsake. So this is a watch, as we call it, your university time. As you see, you don't have watch yet. Yeah, but it's not just very simple because it's made of parquet of this building. It was there was a big fire in 1965, and that's from that time. So I think that thousands of students have been on that floor, and also the very famous persons. But you can read it who have been in this building, and this is the watch. For you, this is the floor of this building, and I think that you will keep it as a warm memory out of the university. So, thank you.
Okay, I need to. It's really cool, actually. And it matches my suit quite well, so I'm going to put it on, but you can tell that I didn't study physics or technology. I'll get my EdDecamp to help me to put it on. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. It was lovely. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you also for the excellent questions, and please join us in front of the main building in 10 minutes.
Okay.